broadcasting from the Cass Corridor in Detroit. It's the Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Kerry Jr. II. There's a new statewide law that will ban smartphones in classrooms. It goes into effect this coming fall. What does the law say, and how different will the learning environment be in Michigan schools as a result? A team of researchers from the University of Michigan recently published the results of a study that looked at smartphone policies that are currently on the books in nearly 800 Michigan school districts. The researchers, Justin Heinze, Brian Jacob, and Elise Thulin, co-authored a piece about their findings in The Conversation, Detroit. The Metro's David Lyons caught up with the editor of that story, Eleanore Catolico, to better understand the new law and the policies already in place on the district level.
The new law basically establishes baseline regulations for all public and charter school districts to follow, specifically K-12. So districts will have to decide, what their policies are and how they want to enforce them. But basically, the law states that there cannot be cell phone use during instructional time. The students could carry basic phones, which they can use to call or text, but they can't use it to access social media. But there's also exemptions to this rule. So the law doesn't stop students from using medical devices, access through smartphones like a glucose monitor, or district-owned devices used for class.
We've had lawmakers on this show and educators. Representative Mark Tisdale from Rochester has been on our show, and we've had Ben Meinke, the superintendent of Novi Schools, on their show as well. Both of them are in favor of stricter rules for smartphones and have been working to basically get smartphones out of the classroom, and they have a range of reasons. Can you tell me through your kind of work on this project, the editing for the story, what you've heard from researchers, why are phones such an issue in schools?
Sure. So researchers have found that students using smartphones during school time can negatively affect their learning. It can negatively affect their mental health, and it could possibly lead to bullying or fights and just harm their well-being overall. Studies have found that smartphone ownership has been linked with lower self-image, lower self-worth among both boys and girls. Girls have reported lower emotional resilience and lower confidence, and then boys have also reported feeling less calm, less stable, and less, empathetic. So there's a lot of deep concerns about phone addiction around even just being exposed to cyberbullying. We know cyberbullying can often happen on social media, and often older teen girls are especially victimized by online abuse.
Mm-hmm. And we've seen earlier this year 2 separate lawsuits that came down on the side of plaintiffs who were suing big tech companies for basically making unsafe digital spaces for teenagers and youth to be on, and that it did hurt them mentally. And those are really big lawsuits, and they're seen as potentially watershed moments in kind of communications and tech policy even. So it's a thing that nationally people have been talking about, and it's starting to make its way into courts and into the law. But there's also a counter argument, which is that, smartphones are another tool, another device that helps students learn or connect to each other. Have you been seeing anything in that regard in this story?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So students have definitely used phones in schools in positive ways, whether that is, monitoring their health or connecting with peers and families, or even contacting digital tip lines to prevent violence. So Michigan has something called the OK to Say program, which allows students to report if they hear or see something that poses a threat to themselves or to other students. And so far, that system reported that in 2024, it had received over 11,000 tips, and those were related to bullying, suicide threats, and drugs. So having students use their phones actually connects them to resources they need, and is really as an attempt to keep each other safe and themselves safe too.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is the law that's going to take effect this fall, statewide, but we have this new study from 3 researchers out of the University of Michigan. Their names are Justin Heinze, Brian Jacob, and Elise Thulin, and they looked at what policies are actually on the books now in the state of Michigan. What did they actually find?
The researchers collected data from nearly 800 Michigan K-12 public school districts across the state, and that represents about 95% of Michigan school districts overall. So we know that this is a really robust data set and is representative of the diversity of school districts in our state. So yeah, they had some really interesting findings and insights. So in addition to most districts already having a school cell phone policy, only 2.5% of districts required individual schools to basically come up with their own rules on their own. And then just under 3% of Michigan districts had no stated policy at all. So the research did note, it's possible districts communicated, their policy through more informal channels, or in practice were just letting schools decide on their own.
Well, it's pretty interesting. A lot of districts, sounds like, already have a policy that would satisfy the law that's going on to the books. And there are some that might actually need to get in line, but not that many. I mean, just a few percent sounds like don't have anything on the books. And that's who this law is really going to get moving, sounds like.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the researchers really sought to understand, what the landscape is like out there for school cell phone policies, because we know how much of an effect it's having on students and teachers' lives and these learning environments, and really understanding, which policies could really help students and which could potentially hurt them. So that was really the ultimate motivation behind this study.
So it sounds like most districts have a policy that really satisfies the law that's going into effect in the fall. But of course, they don't all have the same methods and the same policies. So can you talk about how those vary from district to district?
Sure. So based on the database of school cell phone policies that researchers collected, they were able to kind of sort them out into two broad categories, when policies were enforced and how policies were enforced. So the most common approaches included bell-to-bell restrictions. Basically, that just means students were allowed to use their cell phones at any time during the school day, including lunch or passing periods between classes. Another approach was called schedule-based restrictions. So that means cell phone use was prohibited during class time, but not during lunches or in between classes. And then more than half of school districts adopted a no-show policy. Basically, it's just telling students, don't show your phone during class, keep it out of sight, put it in your backpack, put it in your locker, put it in your pocket.
That one seems kind of like the default common sense right away policy before anything's on the books.
Right.
If I'm a teacher and kids are on the phone and they're not paying attention, they're distracted, put it away.
Yeah, and I think that's obviously the cheapest, and it's also encouraging students to develop habits on their own, to be disciplined in that way, to, be able to manage their behavior and understand, prioritize their time and when they must be engaged and present in a classroom, and, part of growing up.
Yeah, well, I mean, Eleanor, do you remember when you were in high school, did anyone have flip phones yet?
Oh, I had a pink Razor.
You had a pink Razor, and did you use it during school?
No, I was a good kid.
Okay, I think I had a phone the last semester of high school, a flip phone, or maybe it was during college, but I was using T9 texting. You could text underneath the table, but it's so different now. It's hard to imagine not being distracted by that if I had it on me.
Yeah, I can't imagine the inundation and exposure a young person is dealing with right now in their classroom and all the pressures that are happening,
Yeah,
it's hard.
It is, and that pink Razor you had would count as a basic phone probably.
Yeah,
that one. That one you could still have on your person even now because it just had texting. I think it's going to be interesting to see how much teachers can truly help students develop these habits. That's one more thing that teachers need to add to the day, and they're already trying to get students to achieve higher scores on their standardized tests and adjust to an ever-changing world and just be better students. And now, there's a new skill to learn, which is a difficult one. And a lot of the lawmakers who have been leading the charge to legislate against smartphones in schools have been talking about how they're addictive. And so you're really asking educators to be on the front lines of trying to basically curb this kind of technology addiction as well.
So yeah, the researchers noted that, if a district is in a position of creating a new policy or wanting to switch their existing policy to something else, they really have to weigh, different factors. How much time do you want teachers or staff to devote to really monitoring and enforcing the school cell phone policy throughout the day? How much money do you want to potentially invest in new equipment, whether those are lockable pouches or storage bins? Or how do you, what do you want to consider in terms of, students, and wanting them to maybe manage their own behavior and develop habits on their own about their own phone use too. So I think those are a different mix of things to consider. But also too, we have to also think about the teacher's safety as well. There have been incidents in the past where teachers have been met with violence when trying to enforce a cell phone policy, trying to take a phone away from a student. So yeah, those are all considerations districts will have to weigh when crafting their policy.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if it changes a whole lot, since so many districts already have policies that will satisfy this law. But there might be something to a statewide law coming into effect that kind of punctuates the policies themselves and makes them seem like, hey, these are lasting. This isn't just your district. This is the whole state. Maybe that's part of the enforcement picture.
And one thing about the law, too, that I should mention, there technically is no penalty for not adopting a policy. So the onus is really on them. The responsibility really is on them to kind of figure out what works best for their students and their communities.
But it seems the political will is there. The popular support is there.
Oh, definitely.
This in a legislature that has had trouble passing things recently in our state, they got this one through because it's a bipartisan supported issue and something that very broadly we've heard a lot about on this show that
and,
people are concerned with.
Nationally, there's overwhelming support for some form of limiting smartphones throughout school. I know the Pew Research Center had some data about this. They polled American adults last year, and they were saying about 74% of adults support banning middle school and high school students from using cell phones during class. And that support has actually gone up from 68% in the previous year. There's been movements across the country. The phone-free schools movement was started by parents because they were worried about student mental health and academic disengagement, students being unable to learn because they are so distracted by their phones. And, Michigan is among 36 states that have some version of a law that limits smartphone use in schools. And actually, there's some cases in different states where their laws in other states are actually stricter than Michigan's. New York, as an example, theirs is actually specifically barring students from using phones during the school day, which also includes lunch, recess, and in between classes. So and that went into effect starting last fall.
So it's bell to bell in New York then.
Yeah. Right now, more than half of this country has some sort of limit on smartphone use in schools. So everybody recognizes that is a problem.
And in Michigan, it sounds like about 95% of districts, at least public and charters, have some policy to do that already. So there's not just a burgeoning movement. This is kind of a reality. Sounds like the policy might just be catching up with the technology now. Eleanore, before I let you go, I want to know a little bit more about what's coming down the pike for the Conversation Detroit, and really just a little bit about the Conversation Detroit, because it's a new initiative and people might be familiar with the Conversation's national publication online. But tell us about the local one.
Our writers are academics, and they write articles either based on their research or they provide explanatory or analysis on local issues that are relevant to Detroit and Michigan as a whole. And some of the focus areas we're looking at, this year include, challenges related to housing and home ownership. We're following closely what Mayor Mary Sheffield does and hope that our writers can provide insight into some of the policy proposals that she's put forth in the public, and we can provide some evidence-based context to that to understand how they've worked or where they have not. There have been certain limitations, so we are following the Sheffield administration. We also love doing deep dives into cultural and intellectual history. We've done pieces on Michigan Central, Motown. So yeah, it really runs the gamut. We really want the stories to reflect the diversity here in the city of Detroit and in Michigan overall.
Well, sounds like the Metro. We run the gamut too, and we've featured articles and authors of Conversation Detroit pieces several times on the show already.
Yeah, thank you for doing that.
And it was nice to have you on to kind of walk us through this new law and really what are the policies that are already on the books. I think it's pretty interesting to find out that almost all the school districts in the state already have a policy, and many of those will pretty much satisfy the new law that's going into effect in the fall. And again, that study is from Justin Heinze, Brian Jacob, and Elise Thulin, all from the University of Michigan, and they co-authored this article in The Conversation Detroit. It's titled, "We Collected Data on How 779 Michigan School Districts Are Regulating Student Cell Phones. Here are the trends." And thank you for bringing us the trends, Eleanor, and we'll have you back next time.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
Eleanore Catolico is the editor of The Conversation Detroit. You can find a link to that article on our website at wdet.org/metro. %40 of children have a tablet by the age of 2. Poor literacy rates across the country, including in Southeast Michigan, raise the question, how does screen time affect student learning and development? Ginny Radesky is a professor at the University of Michigan Medical School. Robin Vincent spoke with her last year about when kids should be using devices with screens.
Parents are working so hard. Their work is a grind. They often have multiple jobs. They may not have enough social support. So what we've found is that media is often used as a resource when parents are exhausted, they need a break, they want their child to calm down or be occupied. There are healthy ways to have media use in early childhood. But media is designed right now to grab our attention and hold onto it. And that means it can really easily take up so much of your day. And that's where it becomes more of a problem.
Oh, my gosh, Dr. Radesky. I mean, I think about as an adult, as someone who should be able to control themselves a little bit better around devices and social media. When I think about how difficult it is for me, then that really puts things into perspective, what happens with kids and their attention. And I think you touched on some really important points here about why kids are getting tablets so early. You would say that this is more than anything else just a reflection of the challenges that parents are facing right now.
Yeah, that is part of it, because they see that media helps both. Well, they both want to educate their kids and have their kids be tech savvy. That's what I hear from parents in my interviews. But they also recognize how much of a relief it is when your child is just quiet and occupied and you can have your own brain space and you can, get some laundry done or other things like that. So I want to reflect that. Also, the fact that these devices have been heavily marketed to families, trying to make it seem like your kid needs this to keep up. And right now, tech companies make so much money off of families' attention. Every time we pick up and engage with social media, that just adds more ad revenue to these really powerful and wealthy tech companies and all their shareholders. So if that is one motivation for families to say, I want to create some boundaries around this, I don't want to feel so compulsively drawn to all of these platforms like YouTube or Instagram or other things all the time. I think that's a good place to start, is recognize there's a big business model behind why this feels like it's so hard to control.
I do want to shift, if we could, a little bit to talk about child development. I'm wondering, Dr. Radesky, how important are those early years? And I'm thinking about kids under 5 years old and how, it can be disruptive for them and their development when they're using different devices.
Right. And that is why I started studying this. When I was in my pediatric residency in Seattle, I saw all of these devices coming into families, hands when they were in visits with me. And then I did a developmental behavioral pediatrics fellowship in Boston, where again, it was just kind of growing and growing in the early 2010s. And there were a couple main concerns I had and which motivated my research. One is, in the first 5 years of life, you establish your safe, secure, and nurturing relationships with adults, your caregivers, your teachers. You have these really important attachments that you're building that help you learn about yourself, build your sense of self, learn how to regulate your emotions, learn how to learn and how to handle frustration. And then there's also, building upon that, a lot of activities that kids do that are very based in your sensory motor system, where you are crawling around and putting stuff in your mouth, and you are scribbling with crayons and using Play-Doh or running around outside, that are really important activities for building the parts of your brain that help you succeed in school. And I'm not just talking about, it's really important to have language, fine motor skills, gross motor skills. I'm also talking about social and emotional skills that help our kids communicate when they're frustrated and not just kind of fall out or have a tantrum every time they feel a little bit of frustration.
Would you say then that this is a key time for kids to develop resilience?
Yeah, absolutely. And also parents to develop resilience, if I'll add that. I think of things so relationally. So, as kids develop skills, parents develop skills too. One of our big skills as parents is to tolerate our children's distress. And that doesn't mean you ignore all their cries. You kind of try to figure out, okay, do they need me right now? Do they need a little bit of help or support? Or can I help teach them a skill based on this frustration or struggle that they're having right now? Once they've calmed down, of course, you can't really teach in the moment when kids are in the red zone, as we say. I use color zones all the time to talk about emotions, and kids learn best when they're in the green zone and they're calm and focused. So if that's one motivation for parents to say, I'd really like to carve out enough time in the day that they are doing these developmental activities that really help their brain. Number one is sleep. So making sure that media use is not getting in the way of sleep. I practice at U of M. I have patients who wake up in the middle of the night and turn the TV on or their gaming console on because they've gotten into the habit of, I'm awake. Well, let me do something interesting. A second skill is, learning to play in kind of an unstructured way, just like following their own brain or their own imagination. So that might be just with some, dolls or blocks or nature outside, not following, compared to an app that might say, here, match these colors. Here, write their ABCs. That's a very structured, highly, restricted activity. I want kids to really feel comfortable trusting their own ideas and being curious.
Ginny Radesky is a professor of pediatrics at the University of Michigan Medical School. All right, coming up, how much do online reviews drive business or keep it away? We'll discuss the changing landscape of consumer reviews next on the Metro. Stay right there.